The following is a production of Sharkflight Media. Sharkflight Media. Sharkflight Media. Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of CKP Confidential. These are exclusive reads for exclusive readers right here on the CKP Patreon account. I'm Ian J. Malone, joined tonight by a guy with a very anticipated book. As CKP readers know, the Prince of Britannia series was a huge hit. Sold lots and lots of books, made lots of fans. And a lot of folks were raised an eyebrow when they found out that the last book was going to be the last one in that series. But we told you then, this is not the end of the Britannia series. It's just the end of the Prince of Britannia series. And so since then, folks have been asking, well, what's next? What are we doing? And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So welcoming back to the program, Mr. Fred Hughes. How you doing tonight, buddy?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a little deja vu. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago that we were talking about Prince Imperator, and here we are talking about the next book.
Yeah, man. Well, speaking of, this is a brand new Britannia series called Heroes of Britannia, and book one is called Heroes Legacy. That's the one that we're here to talk about. So, tell us a little bit about what we can expect. Obviously, a lot has happened in this world and with these characters. We're about to open a brand new chapter in all of this. So what can readers expect from this?
Well, there was a certain amount of method to the madness, as we talked about when we talked about Prince Imperator. The Empire has changed. Emperor Hazard was killed in a battle, and now the Empire has to deal with his death. And Heroes Legacy is the first book in the follow-up series, Heroes of Britannia. And it talks about the people who are going to step up to replace Hazard. At the end of the last book, obviously, it was the start of a war against another alien species. They started it, obviously. Now the Empire has to deal with another war, deal with a boy emperor, Hazard's son, Edward. And that's what the first book, Heroes, is about. It's about how the Empire deals with his death and moves forward.
Very cool. Well, folks, the name of the book is Heroes Legacy. As noted, it is book one in the brand new Heroes of Britannia series, due out from CKP on September 26th. But as we do here on CKP Confidential, we're going to give you a little taste of what that's going to be all about right now. So, Fred, I give you the mic, sir. You can begin reading when ready.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. Hiroko stared out into the sea of faces that peered intently at her. King Isaac I had commissioned the construction of the kingdom's cathedral soon after his election as the first king of the Kingdom of Britannia. That kingdom was the predecessor of the empire. Isaac envisioned a cathedral large enough for coronations, royal weddings, and, like today, royal funerals. The archbishop had ordered balconies that were typically closed off and overlooked the main hall open to allow for additional seating. Hiroko was certain that there were over 5,000 citizens crammed into the church. Then there were the people outside the cathedral, the people who wanted to be present at the event but couldn't get inside. General Devereux, the head of palace security, had informed her the current guess was that the crowd numbered over 200,000. They'd watched the ceremony on large video screens set up around the outside of the cathedral. But those numbers paled compared to the people who would watch the funeral on the vids. Hiroko's press advisor predicted 500 million on the home planet of Britannia would watch the event live. The count of the people throughout the empire who'd watched the tape broadcasts would number close to 1 trillion. Sitting in the front pews were the dignitaries, mostly star system leaders who'd been able to attend on such short notice. The heads of state of 41 star systems were present. Their titles ranged from king to prime minister to president. They were, in a sense, Hiroko's bosses, since if enough of them could ever agree to, they could remove her as regent. That was unlikely since system leadership rarely agreed on anything. After all, That's why the kingdom and now the empire existed. Someone had to make sure things got done. There were two surprise dignitaries present. Georgy Petrov, current chairman of the Russian Federation, had come to honor the man he called a friend, as did the most surprising guest of all, Chief of Chiefs Dark Wanderer, the leader of the people, as the race of aliens most Imperials referred to as the Swarm, had come. Like the Marxist chairman, he felt he owed the survival of his race to Hazard King and wanted to honor that man. The people were a beetle-like race who lived in a toxic environment. At least it was toxic to humans. Today, he sat in a special climate-controlled enclosure placed just to the right of the central pews. 8 power-armored Imperial guards had carried the pod into the cathedral, and it had caused quite the stir. Heroku and only a handful of others had ever seen an alien in person, and Gawkers had immediately pressed forward to see the leader of the race the Empire had fought for 100 years. The phalanx of guards formed a half circle between the rest of the attendees and the alien leader. Quit wool gathering, Heroku, she berated herself. Get on with it. As she was about to start her speech, Heroku glanced down at her son, Edward. He was now the emperor. And she suddenly understood the looks and mumbled sentences he'd uttered over the course of the day's events. OMG, Heroku thought, as she suddenly realized that her son did not really know his father. I guess that should be who he was. Past tense, Heroku. Mentally, she shook her head. You were right the first time, is. Hazard will always be that man. Hazard had insisted that they shield Edward as much as possible from the rest of the world. Outside influences had corrupted Hazard's brother, Edward's namesake, and led him down a path of darkness. Ultimately, he'd helped so-called friends conduct a coup against his own mother. Hazard had foiled the plot and ultimately become emperor himself. He'd wanted to ensure his own son didn't stumble down that same path. Dignitaries, honored guests, and fellow citizens, before I begin, I want to ask in advance that you pardon any stumbles in my remarks. You see, because of something I just realized, I find it necessary to deviate from my prepared speech. Edward, would you join me up here? Heroku asked and held a hand out to her son. The request startled the new emperor, but he quickly recovered and moved toward the raised dais. It wasn't until he turned and saw the crowd that he became nervous, but his mother's hand on his shoulder quelled at least some of the anxiety. I present Emperor Hazards and my son, Emperor Edward, Heroku announced. Heroku turned and looked at her son. Today you watched as we brought your father to his last resting place. You saw the pomp and ceremony, but you also saw the thousands of our citizens, your citizens, now that you are emperor, who lined the streets. Some cried, some just stared, but all were there to pay their respects to a man they felt made a difference. The regent turned and looked out over the assembled guests. Then you heard people talking about your father, recounting stories of who he was and what he meant to them. Some recounting acts of bravery, while others told of his insight and wisdom. There were even humorous stories that told of his humanity. I realized as I came up here to deliver this final eulogy that, to you, it was all about a man you did not know. But just as you didn't know that man, the rest of the empire didn't know the man you called father. The man who laid on a couch in a dark library, cradling you on his chest as he cried over the death of a friend. A leader who fibbed to get out a meeting so he could give you horsey rides on his back in his office. The hero who helped you with homework and built forts out of toy blocks on the library floor, all while telling you stories. Heroku had to pause. Tears were beginning to well in the corners of her eyes, and she had to get her emotions under control if she were to finish. I'm certain that learning how the rest of the empire thought of your father was a surprise. That was both your father's and my doing. We wanted to shield you so that you could enjoy your childhood. But now, far earlier than we expected, you are the emperor. If you weren't concerned about being able to do the job before, I'm sure you are now. Heroku looked back down at her son and saw that he was staring up at her. Yes, your father was a great man, and now you have to follow him in ruling our empire. But I'll tell you a remarkable fact. Her father didn't consider himself a hero. He often told me and others that he was only a man who saw what needed to be done and then did it. In fact, he never wanted to be emperor. But once again, duty compelled him to accept the responsibilities. The cathedral was silent. Heroku looked back up and out toward the throng. The man I fell in love with and eventually married was Hazard King. Others have recounted how early in his life he led two separate lives, one as Prince Henry Kane, second son and later crown prince to Empress Elizabeth, and another as Hazard King, imperial fleet officer. But there was only ever a single man. Only disguises and subterfuge made him appear to be different men. The inner person was always the same. Heroku became caught up in the moment of remembering her husband, and suddenly there were no more tears. The memory of their love now energized her. Hazard was by no means a perfect man. He made his share of mistakes. If you were a friend, you were a friend for life, and he accepted you, warts and all. But if you crossed him, well, people who crossed him didn't enjoy it. And I'll tell you now, he had a long, long memory. You heard military officers talk about his skill in battle, Edward. She glanced at her son. You heard your great uncle Edmund talk about him taking his flagship into the heart of the swarm attack. That action led to our ultimate victory in the Iris system. But he failed to mention how his mistake in the opening phase of that battle led to the destruction of most of the fleet's carriers and almost cost us the battle. Heroku let her gaze wander across the sea of faces. But now he's gone. There are those who think it's the way he would have wanted to go, fighting in a battle against desperate odds. And yes, it would have pleased my husband to know that his last actions saved so many spacers from death. But you'd be incorrect in that's the way he'd have preferred to die. He loved me and his son, and would have preferred to stay with us for as long as the deities allowed. He'd have preferred to die in his bed with his friends and family around him. And Hazard loved the Empire. Sometimes more than I think he loved me and Edward. He would have wanted to stay and make things right. Because frankly, that's what he was best at. My final message to everyone, Heroku gestured toward the crowd, both here in this cathedral and to those watching on the vids, is this. Be true to yourselves. Listen to your conscience and do what's right. That's how Hazard lived his life, and it's how we need to live ours. Heroku looked back down at her son and took his hand. Let's go home.
Powerful, powerful stuff, you guys. That is Fred Hughes reading from the brand new book, Heroes Legacy, Book 1 of the Heroes of Britannia series. Folks, this is one you're obviously going to want to get. Dropped September 26th from Chris Kennedy Publishing. To learn more about Fred or any of his books, any of the Britannia series or otherwise, go to fredhughespublishing.com. You can also catch up with him via his author page on Facebook. And like all CKP authors, you can talk with him if you wish on the CKP The Factory Floor group. For Fred Hughes, I'm Ian J. Malone, and we'll see you next time on CKP Confidential.